And so Animals was the first time that you made enough money to like really replace your income. Cause with, you were getting a lot of love from the community and stuff with Bulb and whatnot on the forums, but that wasn't monetizing in any way, was it?
Oh, no, not at all. And I had so many people ask me why I didn't, but it's just because I felt really guilty because what I was putting out there was just like these unfinished, it's like these low responsibility ideas, right?
Right, right.
So the idea of charging for that just felt so counterintuitive and
I
almost
mean, the only thing you could have done back then anyway would be Bandcamp, which would have been peanuts anyway.
right. There wasn't really any sort of vehicle to monetize it efficiently. But people were like, well, why don't you just put it together on an album? But it's like, well, then I'd have to like re-record these and finish them and feel good. And then I'm just back in the same problem. Like, I
Grind.
don't really want to make an album. I want to make a Periphery album and I want to start a band, you know? And it's like, I get what you're saying, but the result of that is just a little bit of money, whereas the result of working on Periphery is a larger goal. Even if it's not money immediately, it's something that's important to me. So that's why I always focused on that. But I did have a lot of people ask why I didn't monetize that stuff, and I kind of didn't do anything with it forever until like kind of recently. And again, it was just because Spotify and Three Dot offered an efficient vehicle to put it all
Right.
out, you know?
And at this point, the expectations for that would be super low because everyone understands what it is,
Yes, yes,
you know?
yes.
So,
Whereas then it's like, I know these are unfinished, unmixed, kind of rough ideas. People shouldn't have to pay for that, you know?
although I've listened to some of that stuff recently, and obviously it's rough in a lot of ways, but it sounds really cool for that same reason.
Yeah, I could see that. I mean, there's a lot of records that I love. For example, I love Chaos Sphere, and I think the mix is really cool, even though it's like objectively not great, but I love it, and I don't wish it was any different.
Or like the first Born of Osiris album,
I think
sounds.
that sounds great.
Yeah, exactly. It sounds
Yeah.
putrid by like textbook standards, but it's awesome for what it is.
That's how it sounds. So I
Yeah.
get that, and I also know that I feel like with any of your especially early work, like I feel like the mixes are just horrible on my things. But then I did the solo album and I redid some of the songs, and it's so disheartening. Like people are like, oh, it's not as good as that old version. I'm like, that old version sucks. That was the whole point, you know?
What's crazy is I remember hearing that stuff back in the day and thinking that it sounded insanely good. I was like, how the fuck does some guy, in his bedroom make something that sounds this good? This is insane.
I didn't even think it sounded good back then. It was just the best I could do. Because again, I was like comparing everything I was doing to what like Paul Ortiz, like Chim Spanner, and like
Right.
Apple and Brown were all doing, and all their stuff sounded way better than mine. So I was like, well, we'll get them next time, like
Yeah, well, it's just
trying my best.
there's just something to capturing a specific moment in time
Mhm.
that there's, it just is what it is. You can't ever, like, any recording is a product of like the actual air that was moving in the room at that time and your hand and everything, and there's just no other way to recapture that.
Yeah, Finn, that's a very romantic way of looking at it. I don't mind that.
I
like that.
Would I suggest putting out a Periphery album that sounds like that today?
No.
But it sounds really cool for what it was at the time, and I still think it sounds good in that way.
I definitely see what you're saying, and I think like our generation is also very affected by nostalgia for whatever reason, or maybe that's every generation. We just have the tools to re-explore it more efficiently than other generations.
Well, I really like a lot of the stuff from like the mid to late 2000s that was coming out of MySpace and stuff. For example, like the early Whitechapel stuff. Like I like a lot of the stuff from that era in the same way as I like early punk and hardcore stuff, because it's like really raw and has like a kind of energy that when you learn how to do things the right way, you just it's a different vibe. It's not necessarily better or worse, it's just different. It has that kind of like, you leave in mistakes. I wouldn't even say mistakes, like imperfections that now you would EQ out. And that's not wrong, but there's something I really like about sort of those earlier kind of digital native recordings that I think is actually a genuinely unique vibe. Does that make sense?
What you're saying makes so much sense. And it's something that like I struggle with and have always struggled with a little bit. It can be extended to what I call demolitis.
Yes.
When you're doing an album, because usually when we're writing, at least, there's this honesty and this intent to get the idea out and to just get it good enough and not obsess over the minutia in this really clinical way, because you're like, well, we're just trying to get the idea out. And what you end up with is a vibe that can sometimes get erased when you do it for real and you really try to get it perfect, and you realize those imperfections are what gave it character and a little bit of vibe. And sometimes you end up chasing that, and sometimes you end up not nailing that. So it's a really interesting thing that you're bringing up, because it's something that like, that's something that I would say I would wager most musicians who demo stuff and re-record it struggle with. This idea of when you re-record it, you end up with something that's not necessarily better, it's just different.
Right.
That can be kind of interesting and difficult sometimes. And then lately, I've been focusing more on trying to not erase those things and find ways to preserve that and to keep that stuff kind of sacred, because I've been through so many rounds of cleansing all the character by trying to make things sort of perfect, like we were saying, like textbook perfect.
Yeah. But
then it kind of loses a little bit of what makes you you. And it's what you were talking about. It's like the air was moving, the vibe, whatever it was in the room, there was some energy, this almost palpable energy, like when you're in this creative mode, which I love. And then when you're redoing it, you're doing it under the lens of like, okay, now I must make this presentable for everyone else. And it's just your mindset's completely different. And it is really, really hard to get into that initial mindset. It's really easy to get into the clinical mindset, that sort of flow state mindset of like, oh, the ideas are just, this could be anything, you know, which is one of my favorite feelings in the world. That is really, really hard to just make happen in the first place, but it's nearly impossible to recreate. So you'll never really nail that intent.
And you can never make yourself naive again either.
Yes. Yeah. No, now it's already a formed thing and you're used to it and you're used to how it sounds. I can't tell you, like, anyone who's demoed stuff and re-recorded knows exactly what we're talking about. And anyone else will be like, that I don't get it, you know, but it's such a massive part of the dynamic, and it has caused a lot of disappointment with final mixes over the years, to where like I'm actively trying, especially with this latest album we're working on, that was like a big thing of trying to keep that stuff kind of sacred somehow.